thermometer joke. How many people here are currently employed? All but the 3 who were looking, I'm imagining. And when you came to do your last negotiation, how many people negotiated their job offer or took what they were offered? First is negotiated job offer and took what you were offered. Yeah, that's a big problem in our industry. So what I'm here to talk about today is sort of how to negotiate a job offer. If you want to do it yourself, I'll give you some pointers. I'll also tell you about the service that we just started, and I'll give you a little bit of background about why we're doing this. So going way back, my business partner and I started a company called Brickwall Management about 23 years ago, and we manage musicians. We manage people like John Mayer and Vanessa Carlton, and still have that company, and it's actually alive, kicking, and doing the best it's ever done. But in the midst of, I don't know if you guys heard, but technology sort of evolved and kind of really badly took over the music industry and kind of crushed it. So we had to figure out what we were going to do during that period. And lo and behold, we had the idea that technologists were the new rock stars and we should see if they need representation. So we did a little experiment and we discovered that the business model of being talent managers applied to this kind of talent as well. And we set up a company called 10X Management, which is about 6 years old. And at that company, we help very high level tech freelancers find and negotiate their jobs. We deal with the contracts, we deal with the invoicing, and we take all of the pain points out of it. And the people we've been working with are very happy. Most of them have been with us for about that length of time at this point. Along the way, we discovered a sort of new opportunity, which is this full-time job thing, where people are offered jobs and often just accept them because they're either uncomfortable or it's just the wrong. They feel like they are a little person against a very big company, and they are very reluctant to risk anything by pushing back or asking too much or seemingly being entitled. So we saw this new opportunity, and we had some of our clients post on Hacker News about this new offering, and lo and behold, with one post, 30 people came in the door to try out this service. Which was very validating, and the results have been really great. It's been very much like what we did in the freelance world, where there's no magic to what we do, at least from our perspective. It seems very easy, but then again, if I had to write some code, that would be really hard, and you guys probably are not so happy negotiating. So there's competing priorities between you and the company, right? You want to get paid more, you want to have a meaningful work, you want to have a better work environment, and many companies want to minimize those things for themselves, not unreasonably, and if you were in their shoes, you would do the same thing. They're just different agendas. And the main thing we want to get to is figuring out how to get you what you guys want and how to give you the tools to do that for yourself. And the first part is taking some of the mystery out of this and just realizing it's a conversation. It's not necessarily adversarial, even though you want different things. There's a reasonable conversation to be had. So the two goals that you guys have, I imagine, is finding a good fit with a company that where you're going to like the work you're doing and getting paid as well as you can for it. Is that a fairly reasonable assessment of everybody's goals in the big picture? So that's great big picture thinking, but there's a lot more details into this process, which is what I want to dive into. So do you even really know what you want in a job? We just covered those two things. But do you know what title you want? Are you going to be asked to move? Are you going to be asked to travel? Are you going to be asked to manage people? Do you know who's going to be managing you? There's so many components of this. And if you don't know what all those options are as a starting point, you're very likely not to get what you want because you didn't know what you wanted. So the first thing we did as we started this process is we developed a little tool that you guys can use called a lifestyle calculator. That's the URL where you can go play with this. We do ask for your email address, but nothing more. These are the 24 different things that can be involved in your job offer, even not for a senior executive. And if you're not, and this little tool, which is a very simple thing, you get 100 points, and you have to now apportion what are the things that matter most to me. So flex time, working from home, is that really important to you? Do you have kids you want to spend more time with? Having an office, Does that matter to you? Or being in an open floor plan? Like, these are things that if you don't think about, and I'm not suggesting that because you decide you want all of these things, you're going to get them all. But if you don't start from the standpoint of what matters to me as an individual, I want to customize my job offer to me, you have no hope of getting it. And by going through this process, even the people who came in from Hacker News who didn't have a job offer yet or weren't ready to work with us, everybody who filled this out said, wow, I didn't even think about that. I didn't even know to think about that. So I encourage you, when you're thinking about your next job thing, to just go through this exercise. Other than your email address, we get nothing. You've now figured out what you want. Now you're at the starting point. So you know what you want. A company wants to hire you. And then what's the next part of this? So they're gonna come to you and they're gonna say, oh, what are you looking for? Usually how it goes, right? What's your salary requirement? Is that a familiar question you guys have heard? So how do you handle that? Anybody want to give me how you've responded to that question?
I usually go ahead and say a number that would make me happy.
Okay.
And that's usually where I start, but the thing is probably the smart thing might be to do is to ask, what's your budget? But
I mean, what you did is what most people do. Oh, because it's being webcast, they want everybody on mic. You did what most people do, and the truth is, so let's say your number was $1 million. Would you be happy with that number if you got no equity, you got 0 days off, you worked for a total ass hat, and you were going to be miserable there, versus a place that was going to treat you well, you had a team behind, like all of those things that we just went through. So what we encourage when you get asked that question is that you always go with a range. It's somewhere between here, and the lowest end should be the number that you gave, and then the highest end is way up there, and it really depends on what the rest of the offer looks like. I don't have enough to give you an answer yet. You're asking me what I want my life to look like with a single number without a whole lot of other information. Are you offering me equity? Is there a 401k? Do I have benefit? Like all of these things. What's my title? I personally don't care about titles in the world. I think that they are not necessarily important. There are moments that they make sense because sometimes it helps you understand who you're dealing with and what level they're at. But beyond that, they can be very wrapped in ego. I had to change my perspective about that in working with you guys on this because title matters. It doesn't matter for this job. It matters for your next job. When you're coming out of this job, the title you're coming out with is going to inform your next move. So that is why that actually carries some weight. So the main thing here is when you get asked that very early question, and often it's by a recruiter who's running interference in the middle between you and the company, you want to be really clear and sure that you're giving yourself a lot of wiggle room. So as more information comes in, you can reposition that number. I've had a lot of people who sort of feel very stuck. I wish I hadn't said that number because now I know this, now I know that. So
the one thing I did remember that I did say in addition to the salary was I wasn't as nuanced as your list there, but I did give them my absolute must-have, my deal breakers. And one of my deal breakers right off the bat was I need minimum 1 day remote and I need a minimum 4 weeks vacation. So I had stated in addition to salary, I did state those two things. But I didn't weight them, but I just kind of was like, it's almost like I'm dating. Like, yeah, I'm not gonna, that's a deal breaker. So I did state that up.
But that's excellent. That's above what my sample size is not huge yet, but from what I've seen, that's already a step beyond. Wait, sorry. I can hear you, but the people in the internets.
All right, mom back home. Hi. Do you have a recommended range of salary that you request? Because I kind of arbitrarily grabbed from the sky like 15,000 as far as minimum to maximum, but there's no real reasoning behind that other than maybe the recruiter would, raise eyebrows if it's like, oh, you don't care if there's a 30 grand difference.
My answer to like, that's a huge range. What do you mean? Would be exactly what I just said to you. Is like I would in a place where I was going to be miserable. That top end of the range that would compensate me for my misery. And in a place where I'm going to be happy, the bottom end of the range would work also. And since I don't know any of the details yet, or I don't know enough of the details yet, I don't know all the details yet, I don't want to pin it down. Like, it's sort of, it's not completely analogous, but like if you're going in and buying a car and it doesn't come with wheels, like you're not going to be willing to pay the same thing as one that, has wheels and a sunroof and is autonomous. I'd love to just keep the open questions going throughout instead of waiting till the end. So if anybody has anything, just stick a hand up and interrupt. Did I answer your question?
Yeah, more or less. Thanks. It still feels like you could kind of, on that note, it's like, well, you can make my life hell if you're paying me $10 million a year, but I'm also not going to ask, I would never be receiving that. So I guess it feels like there is some realistic finite range.
Do you mean how do you come up with the range?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that definitely requires doing some diligence on what other people are making at similar sized companies. I'm going to get into this a little in a couple slides, but one of the things that's really important is like, where are you living? Making $100,000 in Austin, Texas is very different than making $100,000 in San Francisco or New York for that matter. And companies often don't do a lot of manipulation of this. So I just did one of these transactions where somebody was hiring a CTO and they said, well, what's it gonna cost? And I said, well, if they stay in Texas, then I'm making up places and names here, but if they stay in Texas, then this is fine. But if you want them in the Bay Area, it's going to need to be basically 2x because that's the cost of living difference. There's a lot of people who aren't necessarily playing out those things. I also just worked with two guys who were moving from the States to London. And it was, again, like, hey, before we even get into any of the finer points, you do have to recognize that the cost of living there is so much higher for tax reasons, exchange rate reasons. I mean, these are all the things that you really want to get into considering when you're trying to justify what you're looking for, which is going to be, that's the main point in this process. My experience working with the tech talent that I've worked with thus far on this is sometimes I do it for them and sometimes I'm really just advising them. And I might say to somebody, I think we should ask for 40 grand more than what's being offered here. And they have through the phone, I can hear the recoiling and fear of like, oh, I don't think we can do that. That makes me really nervous. And I say, let me write the email for you and then you decide. And every time they get the email and they're like, oh, I don't mind sending this. This is perfectly reasonable. Why? Because it's not coming through as a demand or something that they're entitled to. It's coming through as a request with very sound data about why this is appropriate. Sometimes that data is, I have an advisor who I'm working with who does a lot of these and he shared this information with me. Sometimes it's data from Glassdoor or any article online. I was doing one of these where somebody was making a case about why the equity, and equity is a whole different thing, but it was an early stage startup, and why they couldn't extend the term of the equity, the exercise term, to be longer. They wanted it to be 30 days from the end of employment. And they said they would go to 90 days. And I was like, that's no good because do you guys know about these terms that I'm using? Should I explain this a little bit? So when you're given options in a company, it's very typical that at the end of your tenure at that company, that your right to buy those shares in the company expires at a certain point. If you're at an early stage company and you work there for 2 years and you've earned a bunch of options and you're now leaving the company, you may have 30 days to decide if you want to write a check to buy equity in this company that you've earned. And if you don't buy it in that moment, it goes away. That company might still be completely underwater. They might be a mess. You might not be sure whether there's a good investment or not. And all of the equity you earned that was partially compensating you for the lower salary is gone. It's not worth anything to you because either you write a check to get it and you're taking a huge risk like an investor, or it goes away. So what I was fighting for in this instance was a 5 or a 10-year option period. So you could sit on the sidelines and see if that company matured into something that was worth buying equity in or not. So the the CEO that I was negotiating against in this instance said, my lawyer said, we can't do that because we'll never get investors with those terms. And I went back and sent a very public link that Mark Andreessen wrote recommending this kind of, Mark Andreessen's a big venture capitalist, recommending these kinds of terms. And that was the end of that conversation. They said, all right, you got us, like we'll do it. And part of what I'm getting at is having the data and having somebody who's dealt with these things is really quite valuable or invaluable. So we just talked about this. Like, how do you create leverage? You sometimes you feel like you really have leverage because you have multiple offers, and sometimes you don't have multiple offers and you feel like you have no leverage. But leverage comes from a whole bunch of things. So you might be in a job where you're perfectly happy and somebody came and offered you a job. You have a lot of leverage in negotiating that new job offer because you don't have to leave. You're not wondering where your rent is coming from. If that job offer goes away, okay, I'm happy where I am. I just did one of these with somebody who got 2x their salary because they were very happy where they were, and we just went crazy in requesting and explaining why it was going to take that to get him to move, and it worked. Lifestyle change. If you're going to be required to do anything that changes your lifestyle, that's a big thing to be able to be like, hey, if I'm going to move across the world, if I'm going to have to work this much or manage this team or whatever it is, I really need to be compensated. And that's a way of creating leverage. Sometimes it feels like out of thin air, but it's really there. Obviously, competing offers is very easy. The strength of conviction is also where you have nothing, but you're like, I'm not going to take this job unless I get X. That is leverage. That is legitimate leverage, especially when yielded carefully and well. Prior compensation is another thing that you can use as leverage. In New York and California, they can no longer ask you what you were making before, but you can still volunteer, well, that's only a little bit more than I was making or less than I was making. And also prior turn down offers. If in your prior job search you had some great high offer that you wouldn't take because it was basically selling yourself to the devil, you can still go back and say, I've already turned down an offer that was higher than that. And you start to, I'm hoping that you're starting to see from this conversation how you can really change the nature of the conversation by bringing in other elements. These are just some examples of situations that you guys will find yourself in as you're going through the process, questions that you'll be asked or things you'll be told. The value of the equity is going to be huge. Have you heard that before? Anybody hear that before? Yeah. From every founder to every employee they've ever hired. What do you do when you have an offer from a company and they want an answer, but you know you're getting another offer? How do you stall? What's the best way to do that? These are some of the things that we can go through. We're pretty well out of time. We've got about 3 minutes left, so I want to open it up to you guys in terms of any of these that are of interest or any other questions so that I can give you useful stuff. I do, and this is obviously self-serving, I do think that having a third party in your corner doing these things is very well worth it. And even if it's not us, there are lawyers who can do this. I think that's probably the main set of options, but I think that they're well worth what they cost. And so far, that's borne out in our case for the deals that we've done. So I turn it over to you guys. Yep. Oh.
Hi, thanks.
Oh, sorry.
Hey, less a jobs hunting question, more like how does 10x as a business balance relationships with potential hirers versus delivering value to talent?
We have only one entity we refer to as clients, which is our talent that we do. The talent we work with as freelancers or the talent that we do this. We do have a two-sided marketplace, so we have to make sure the customers who hire them are happy, but we're very clear. And we're also earning a percentage of our clients, of our talents' revenue. So there's no question which side we're on. We don't take money from companies to go find them things. The only time we get paid by a company is when one of our freelancers is bought out by that company. The company then pays us a buyout thing that's already pre-negotiated. We're not involved, and we have nothing to do with whether that happens or not.
And essentially that's just so that you can keep trading on a good name in the future. It's
Yeah.
not, there's no like, there's no other incentive really.
No, the only loyalty we have to companies is to keep them coming back and make sure they have what they're supposed to have, and that our people are writing good code, documenting it well.
Thanks.
Hey, how you doing? So I'm a founder at an early stage startup, and
Is your equity going to be worth?
well, right.
billions?
So of course, it's like in a way my job to believe that it will, but I totally recognize that everybody would say that, and obviously the chances, when you look at it, in and of itself, is they're slim. And so my question basically, just I'd love to hear your perspective. If I'm trying to get an employee, if I'm trying to hire somebody, is it even worth talking about equity?
I think it is. I mean, you're going to have to talk to investors and customers, and you're going to have to get people to buy in on your vision of this company and why it's going to be valuable. And those early employees are ultimately investors. They're investing part of their compensation in your company, and I think it's worth it. But I also think it's worth being very transparent about what kind of equity you're offering. And I'm not telling you have to do what I said in that other example, but that it's either you're getting real equity, like you're earning equity, or you're not earning equity and you're going to have to pay for this later, and this is your period. I think founders are, in some instances, don't understand it themselves, and in other instances are very happy to sort of gloss over and be like, you're going to get you're going to get this many shares, and it's like, well, what does that actually mean on the cap table, and when do I get them, and do I actually own them? Or
And where does the valuation come from in the future, right?
I mean,
that always seems like the trickiest thing.
The valuation to me is less of an issue because everybody knows that in an early stage company's valuation is somebody's
magic
magic number that they pulled out of where that thermometer went that he was talking about earlier.
Okay. Thank you.
Did you?
I was just going to make one point if somebody didn't have a question.
Yeah, I'll go again if nobody else has a question, but they don't have to either.
There's always a few.
Yeah, I'm a talker. Because I'm curious. I don't know if you guys have much experience with, say, like negotiating raises, but I assume it's a similar set of, weighing, like using leverage and whatever, trying to get more money. So it's part of the reason why I'm like looking for a new job right now is I felt my current company, even though I feel like I've made the pitch as far as value add that I've contributed, which is I've gotten great reviews, feel like I've put in the time, but we're a cash strapped startup, so I keep coming back to me with like reasons why they're not going to delay the salary increase. But at the end of the day, it feels like they're cold and hard and fast numbers for the work that I'm doing, and I'm not being compensated fairly. So it seems the only leverage I can really get is to get a competing job offer, which is at this point is like defeats the purpose of me. I don't want to work at a company that is reactive and not proactive on these matters. But is that? I mean, how do you see, going for a job offer? Like, how do you amass leverage without going out and having to basically leave?
So I think there's a few questions. One is understanding the economics of the company, and can they afford to pay you more and are choosing not to, or are they really not able to do it? And are there other things that they could give you that would alleviate the problem, either more vacation, flex time, more equity? Are those things that would move the needle for you? And if it's just cash, then you may need to get an offer and bring it into them and see. But if you do that, you're also going to have to be ready that if you come in and say, these guys offered me, 10 grand more and blah, 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 I'd really love to stay here. Will you match it? That you pretty much got to go if they say no. Because beyond the discomfort of that, they're signaling to you that they don't value you enough to move that up, and they'd be very short-sighted because replacing you, and this is not a comment on how good your work is or not, but replacing you will be a very expensive proposition for them in terms of finding somebody, getting them onboarded. They'll spend more than that, more than the increase you're looking for in that process and in lost productivity. But unfortunately, a lot of employers don't understand that stuff. We're working on helping them understand that.
All right, thank you, Michael. If anyone wants to get in touch with you, what's the best way?
I'm going to leave a stack of business cards on this table.
Okay.
I don't know what, is there another speaker about to come?
Yeah.
Okay. I do unfortunately have to be at another event, so I'm not going to be able to stick around, which I apologize for to the other speaker. But my cards are here. I'd love to talk to any of you about any of this stuff. Thanks very much.
Thanks so much. Yep. Let's go one more time.